I'm sorry it took me so long to speak to you. Céline Dion's voice trembled as those words fell, not in song, but in confession. At 57, the woman once crowned the Golden Voice of Canada finally broke her silence. For decades, the world adored her, the angel who made Titanic eternal, who turned heartbreak into symphonies, who sang while the world wept. She sold more than 200 million albums, conquered the Oscars, Grammys, and Olympic stages, yet behind that glittering crown lay an abyss no one ever saw. Behind every perfect note that soared to the heavens, there were falls that plunged straight into hell. She whispered, I sang to the whole world with a bleeding heart. I stood before millions, but inside I was breaking. This wasn't a press release. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was Céline, raw, wounded, and human, revealing the truth about the 5 people who, in her words, stabbed her soul. They were not strangers. They were her idols, her lovers, her rivals, and her betrayers. And for the first time, she would speak, not through lyrics, but through the scars they left behind. 5 names, 5 wounds, a lifetime of music and silence. This is not a story about fame, it's a story about survival, of a woman who lost her husband, her brother, her health, and even her voice, yet still stands tall, whispering to the world, I am still here. Long before the spotlight, before the Grammy statues and the standing ovations, there was a tiny wooden house in Charlemagne, Canada, a town so small it barely appeared on the map. It was 1968, and Céline Dion was born the youngest of 14 children in a family that had nothing but love and music. Her mother played an old piano with chipped keys, and her father hummed songs in the kitchen while fixing dinner for 15 mouths. Nights were long, winters were cold, and dreams were fragile. But inside that humble home, a fire was lit. Little Céline sang before she could read. Her brothers and sisters gathered around, laughing, clapping, teasing. And yet, when she opened her mouth, the room grew still. That voice, clear, trembling, filled with light, carried something divine. Her mother, Thérèse, saw it first. She wrote Céline's very first song, Ce n'était qu'un rêve, and recorded it on a homemade tape. That single cassette would change the course of her daughter's life. It landed in the hands of a man who would soon become her everything, René Angelil. René listened once, twice, then pushed aside the clutter on his desk, heart pounding. He didn't just hear a voice, he heard destiny. He mortgaged his house, bet his future, and said, this girl will sing for the world. And she did. From that moment, a poor little girl from Charlemagne rose to the global stage. From small radio shows to the grandeur of the Oscars, from empty halls to arenas roaring her name, Céline Dion had arrived, but every light casts a shadow, and hers was waiting just beyond the applause. For Céline, René wasn't just a manager, he was her mentor, protector, and eventually her husband. Their love story began quietly, built on trust and dreams, and soon became the heartbeat of her entire existence. He was 26 years older, but their souls moved in harmony. He guided her through every note, every stage, every triumph. Together they built an empire of music. She sang at the Olympics, performed for presidents and royalty, and her voice, that voice, became the soundtrack of an era. My Heart Will Go On made the world weep. It crowned her the queen of emotion, the one whose voice could pierce through grief itself. But behind the golden lights and thunderous applause, there was exhaustion, loneliness, and whispers. Céline depends too much on him. She's just a puppet, a voice without a soul. Céline ignored them all because to her, René was not just love, he was home. Then in 2016, that home was shattered. René Angelil, her husband, her rock, died after a long battle with cancer. 2 days later, she lost her brother, 2 funerals in 3 days, 2 pieces of her heart gone forever. She collapsed. For the first time, the woman who had carried others with her voice could no longer carry herself. And when illness struck her body, a rare neurological condition that made her muscles seize, her voice tremble, the tabloids were merciless. Céline Dion, the relic of a golden age. From a golden voice to a trembling ghost, the world moved on, but Céline was still there, fighting, breathing, trying to rise again, because even when her body betrayed her, her spirit refused to surrender. Yet deep inside, she carried something darker, a silence too heavy to bear, a list of names, 5 names that would haunt her forever, 5 people who turned music into pain, friendship into betrayal, and admiration into wounds that never healed. And now, after decades of silence, she was ready to reveal them. The first name on Céline's list was one that shocked the world, Mariah Carey. 2 angels of the 1990s, 2 voices that could shatter glass and silence arenas, 2 women who should have stood side by side as queens of melody. But instead, they became rivals in a war neither truly wanted, yet both were trapped in. The tabloids called it the Diva Showdown. Billboard pitted them against each other, chart for chart, note for note, song for song. And for a while, Céline tried to ignore the noise. Until 1998, My Heart Will Go On had conquered the world, staying at #1 for weeks. Every radio, every award show, every street corner echoed her song of eternal love. And just then, Mariah released My All. It wasn't just competition, it was strategy, a challenge thrown like a blade. When reporters asked Mariah about Titanic's success, she smiled and said, "People bought that record because of the movie, not because of Céline. She just got lucky." Those words burned. Céline read them over and over, each time cutting deeper. When Mariah's single hit #1, her fans chanted, "Mariah is the real diva. Céline only lives off Titanic." At the AMA Awards that year, Céline's name was called. She stepped on the stage, holding back tears as boos echoed from Mariah's fans in the crowd. Under the spotlight, her smile trembled. Her hands shook as she gripped the microphone, not from fear but from heartbreak. And when she sang, it was not for applause, it was for survival. Each note was defiance, each lyric a wound-turned weapon. But the war didn't end there. In 1999, a major European tour was being planned, and Céline was promised the opening slot. Then, suddenly, the producers changed their minds. "Mariah sells more tickets," they told her. "Sorry, Céline." That single sentence turned a decade of hard work into humiliation. She wasn't just fighting for fame, she was fighting for her dignity. "I don't hate her voice," Céline would later whisper. "I hate the way she wanted me gone." And if that betrayal was born from competition, the next one, the second name on her list, would be born from a love that became a cage and ended with a single glass of wine crashing into a man's face. For years, the world adored their duet, Beauty and the Beast, a song that seemed to define romance itself, 2 voices, 1 harmony, and a love that audiences believed had leapt from fairy tale into real life. And perhaps, for a moment, Céline believed it too. Backstage whispers became secret smiles. Long rehearsals became lingering glances. In the quiet corners of hotel bars and late-night studios, she thought she had found someone who truly understood her heart, someone who saw the woman behind the spotlight. She once said softly to a friend, "With Pebo, I felt safe again. After Rene, I thought love could still exist. But fate had other plans." March 1994, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, New York, a night of celebration for the biggest names in American show business. Céline entered the ballroom, radiant in silver, still glowing from her performance earlier that night. And then she froze. Across the room, under the chandelier's golden light, Peabo Bryson was locked in a passionate kiss with another woman. Not just anyone, but Regina Belle, his new duet partner for a whole new world. The laughter around them was deafening. Her glass trembled, the world blurred, and in that moment she realized the man she trusted had chosen humiliation over honesty. She turned to leave, eyes burning. He noticed, and instead of following her, he smirked, raised his glass, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't be surprised. Céline always thinks she's a princess. But in real life, she's just a fame-hungry fool." Laughter erupted. She stood frozen, wounded, humiliated, stripped of her dignity before the entire room. Then, in one impulsive act of pain, she lifted her wine glass and hurled it straight into his face. The music stopped. Red wine dripped down the man she once loved. Cameras flashed, and by morning, every headline screamed, "Céline Dion throws wine at Peabo Bryson. Disney love ends in disgrace." The public mocked her, but behind the scandal, something unexpected happened. His career began to crumble. The man who once sang about eternal beauty faded from the charts, replaced by the image of a man soaked in red wine and regret. Weeks later, Céline met him one last time in a small bar in Atlanta, the same place they once wrote songs together. She asked, voice trembling, "Do you regret it?" He looked at her coldly. "Regret? No. You were just a small chapter in my life, Céline. That chapter's closed. Don't ever say my name again." She walked out into the night, tears streaming down her face, not from anger, but from the death of something pure. The love she believed in had turned to dust. And if a man could wound her that deeply, what came next, from another woman, would cut even deeper. Because the next betrayal came not from love, but from jealousy, pride, and a stolen song that changed everything. Céline had endured rivalry. She had survived heartbreak. But nothing prepared her for the third name on her list, Whitney Houston. The world called Whitney the voice, the queen of soul, the woman whose singing could part the heavens. And Céline, from afar, admired her deeply. When Whitney sang "I Will Always Love You," Céline cried like every other soul on earth. She saw her not as competition, but as inspiration, until one day admiration turned into devastation. In 1993, Hollywood was searching for a voice, the voice, to perform the theme song for a new romantic blockbuster. A demo tape arrived in Céline's hands. She recorded it passionately, pouring everything into that single track. When the director heard her version, he wept. "Céline," he said, "you're our choice. This voice will make the film legendary." For the first time since Beauty and the Beast, she felt that magical spark of destiny again. But weeks later, a phone call shattered it all. "We're sorry, Céline," the voice said coldly. "The song has been given to Whitney Houston." Her heart sank. She asked why, but no one would answer until a songwriter she trusted whispered, "Céline, In Hollywood, talent isn't everything. Whitney has her own ways of convincing people. Céline didn't need to ask what that meant. She hung up, staring at her hands, the same hands that had held microphones, awards, and dreams, now trembling with disbelief. Then the song was released. Whitney's version became one of the biggest hits of the decade. The song Céline had once recorded in tears now belonged to another, and the world cheered her rival, not knowing the heartbreak buried behind that melody. But fate wasn't done yet. In 1994, a grand charity concert was held in New York. Two voices were to share the same stage for a duet, Whitney Houston and Céline Dion, performing The Greatest Love of All. It was meant to be a moment of unity, two legends singing as one, but under the lights it became a battlefield. As the orchestra swelled and the crowd roared, Céline waited for her cue, the part where she was supposed to join Whitney for the climax, but Whitney didn't stop. She held every note longer, louder, stronger, swallowing the orchestra whole. Céline tried to sing her line, but her voice was drowned in Whitney's storm. The crowd rose to their feet, screaming her rival's name. Whitney turned, smiled sweetly, and whispered near her ear, "Sorry, baby, they only need one diva." That whisper was a slap heard around the world. The next morning, the headlines were merciless. Whitney Houston devours Céline Dion on stage. Titanic's golden voice turns into a soulless shadow. Critics mocked her as the Canadian robot. Her fans wrote her letters filled with pain, begging her not to give up. But inside, Céline was already bleeding. Months later, she met Whitney again, this time in a quiet Los Angeles studio. No cameras, no reporters, just two women, face to face. Céline gathered her courage and asked, "Why, Whitney? Why did you make me a joke in front of the world?" Whitney exhaled a cloud of smoke, her eyes sharp as glass. "Céline," she said coldly, "this isn't church, this is war. You've got a voice, but you'll never have soul, and the audience will always choose me." Céline froze. That wasn't rivalry, it was annihilation. A blade slipped between the ribs of her spirit. That night, in her hotel room, she opened her journal and wrote, "I once believed music was the language of love, but tonight I learned it can also be a weapon." The woman she once admired had turned their shared gift into a battlefield, and Céline walked away carrying the wound of humiliation that no award could ever heal. But the next betrayal would be even darker, because it came from the man she once called her idol, a legend who turned admiration into manipulation. Since she was a child, Céline had grown up listening to Frank Sinatra on her family's old radio. His voice, smooth, timeless, and full of warmth, floated through those cold Canadian nights. When he sang "My Way," she imagined herself one day doing the same, singing with all her heart, touching the world like he did. So when, in 1995, she received an invitation to a Las Vegas charity gala where Frank Sinatra himself would perform, it felt like destiny calling. She was nervous, starstruck, and grateful, a student about to meet her master. That night, the ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers. The air was filled with the scent of whiskey, cigars, and legends. And then he appeared. Even in his later years, Sinatra's presence commanded the room. Those piercing blue eyes met hers as he shook her hand and whispered, "Céline, you're the only one who can carry on my ballad legacy." Her heart skipped a beat. For a girl from Charlemagne, it was as if God himself had spoken. A few days later, organizers suggested a duet for the charity album, Sinatra and Céline Dion, 2 generations of greatness. It was a dream beyond dreams. She spent the next 2 days rehearsing, fine-tuning every note, preparing her sheet music for what she thought would be the most meaningful collaboration of her career. When the meeting was set in Sinatra's suite at the Wynn Hotel, she dressed modestly, carried her papers carefully, and knocked on the door with trembling hands. Inside, the room was hazy with smoke. Sinatra sat in a velvet chair, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He smiled slowly, motioning her closer. Céline placed her music sheets on the table and began talking about harmonies, phrasing, key changes, but he stayed silent, watching her. Then he leaned forward and said in a low voice, "You really want this duet, don't you, sweetheart?" She nodded, a heart pounding. He raised his glass and whispered, "Then you know what it costs to keep the spotlight, right?" The air froze. Her hands went cold. For a moment, she thought she misheard him. But when his eyes met hers again, there was no misunderstanding. The meaning was clear. It wasn't about music. It was about power. It was about control. Céline stood up, voice shaking. "I came here for music, Mr. Sinatra, not this." He shrugged, taking another sip of whiskey. "Music's just a small part of the game, darling." She left the room, trembling. Her sheet music clutched to her chest like armor. The next day, she was told the duet had been given to another singer. No explanation, no apology, but the headlines were swift and cruel. Céline Dion loses Sinatra duet due to diva attitude. Too demanding, too cold, too proud. She stayed silent because who would believe her? Who would dare accuse America's greatest legend of such ugliness? Months later, they met again at an event in Los Angeles. She gathered her courage, looked him in the eye, and said softly, "Why did you do that to me?" He smiled faintly, the same smile that once charmed the world, and whispered, "You had your chance, Céline. You turned it down. Don't ever dream of standing beside me again." That wasn't rejection. It was a threat, a declaration of dominance. The man who once taught her how to feel music had turned love songs into a weapon of manipulation. That night, she cried not only for herself, but for every young artist who ever mistook power for admiration. But the deepest wound was still to come, because the fifth and final name on her list wasn't an enemy, it was someone she once called sister. Of all the wounds that marked Céline's soul, none cut as deep as this one, because it came from a woman she loved, admired, and once called family. Her name was Barbra Streisand. In 1997, the two legends came together to record Tell Him. For Céline, it was a dream come true. Barbra was an icon, elegant, fierce, and untouchably powerful. And when they stood side by side in the studio for the first time, Céline couldn't stop her tears. Their voices blended like sunlight and silk, one warm, rich, and deep, the other pure and soaring. When the final note faded, Barbra touched her shoulder and said, "Céline, you're the little sister I never had. Music connects us forever." Those words meant everything. After years of rivalry, betrayal, and heartbreak, Céline believed she had finally found someone who saw her not as competition, but as kin. She told every reporter, every fan, "Barbra is my idol. Singing with her is the greatest honor of my life." But that illusion would soon collapse. In February 1998, both women were invited to perform at a grand gala in Beverly Hills. The organizers requested a short rendition of Tell Him as a surprise gift to the audience. Céline was nervous, but excited. It was supposed to be their moment of sisterhood. The lights dimmed, the crowd erupted, the orchestra began, and then something went wrong. Barbra sang straight through the climax, Céline's part, the very moment that showcased both their voices together. Céline waited for her cue that never came. She was left to hum background harmonies, her microphone forgotten, her presence reduced to an echo. When the applause thundered, Barbra turned to her with a radiant smile, wrapped her in an embrace, and whispered, "You were wonderful." But Céline could feel it. Something had changed. The sisterhood had died in that instant. Backstage, still shaking, she gently asked, "Barbra, why did you take the entire climax? We had an agreement." Barbra's eyes turned cold. "Céline, you need to understand something. There's only one Barbra Streisand in this world. You've got the voice, but not the depth. Your technique, I'm soul. Don't ever think we're on the same level." The words struck like knives. That night, the headlines blared. Barbra Streisand overshadows Céline Dion at Gala. One critic wrote, "Céline may soar, but Barbra has roots. One is light, the other is depth, and the audience always chooses depth." Her fans were furious. Hers laughed. They called Céline Barbra's backup singer. Months later, they crossed paths again at a Manhattan party. Céline approached her one last time, hoping for peace. "Barbra, I've always respected you, but why? Why did you have to make me look small?" Barbra raised her champagne glass, smirked, and said, "Because you needed a reminder, darling. There's only room for one queen in showbiz, and it isn't you." Laughter erupted around them. Céline stood motionless, the humiliation cutting deeper than any headline ever could. That night, she returned to her hotel and cried, not for fame, not for pride, but for the death of something she had always believed in, friendship. The one woman who had called her sister had turned into her final betrayer. 5 names, 5 wounds, and one truth, that in the world of fame, love is fleeting, but betrayal is eternal. By the time the last knife fell, Céline Dion was no longer the young girl from Charlemagne who dreamed of songs and love. She was a woman carved by loss, a widow, a mother, a survivor. Behind her radiant smile, there were sleepless nights, hospital corridors, and an ache no applause could cure. She had endured betrayal from friends, lovers, idols, and then fate struck again. In 2016, her husband and soulmate, René Angélil, died after years of battling cancer. 2 days later, she buried her brother. The world sent condolences, but Céline was broken beyond words. She stopped singing for a time, the stage lights went dark, and for the first time in her life, silence felt heavier than any note she had ever sung. But pain, as it always had, found its way into her art. She returned to the microphone, trembling but defiant, and when her voice cracked, she smiled through the tears, because every imperfection now carried the story of her scars. Then, a cruel twist of destiny. Her body began to betray her. Muscles stiffened, her hands trembled, her voice, that once soared above oceans, now faltered mid-song. Doctors gave it a name, stiff person syndrome. A rare and merciless disorder. Céline collapsed more than once, sometimes on stage, sometimes alone at home. She could feel her body turning against her, one spasm at a time. And yet, when the world began to whisper, "She's finished. She's a relic of the past," she rose again, fragile but unbroken. In 2022, she finally stood before a camera, not to sing but to speak. Her voice trembled, her eyes wet. "I love music," she said softly, but my body is betraying me. Every day is a battle. I go through therapy. I scream in silence when my voice fails me, but I will not stop. Because if I stop, they win. The ones who mocked me, who called me soulless, who wanted me gone. I won't let that happen. The world fell silent. Millions cried because, for the first time, the diva everyone thought untouchable became human, vulnerable, real, and radiant in her pain. Now, Céline no longer sings to prove herself. She sings to survive. Her voice, once a weapon of glory, has become a prayer of endurance. But even amid sickness and sorrow, she finds light in the laughter of her 3 sons, in the warmth of the Las Vegas sun, in the quiet moments where music still lives inside her. I've lost my husband, she once whispered. I've lost my health, but I haven't lost the song inside my heart. Because that song, bruised, trembling, and imperfect, is what keeps her alive. Today, at 57, Céline Dion sits quietly in her garden in Las Vegas, the city that once echoed with her sold-out shows, her thunderous ovations, her unforgettable standing nights. But now, there's only the sound of wind in the trees, the laughter of her children, and the faint hum of a woman who has walked through every kind of fire and still stands. She watches her sons, René Charles, Nelson, and Eddie, playing under the sunlight. Sometimes she trembles when she reaches for them. Sometimes she can't finish a song, but she smiles. Not the red carpet smile the cameras demanded, but a real one, born from pain, love, and survival. She no longer needs to prove herself to the world, because she already has. The tabloids once called her a relic of a golden age. But what they don't understand is this: Céline Dion's voice is no longer just music. It's history. It's defiance. It's proof that the human soul can keep singing even when the body can't. In her interviews now, she often pauses, looking far away before whispering, I've been betrayed by friends. I've been mocked by rivals. I've lost the man I love, but I'm still here. I'm still singing because my scars are my songs. She carries every wound: Mariah's mockery, Peebo's betrayal, Whitney's cruelty, Sinatra's manipulation, Barbra's arrogance, not as burdens, but as lessons. Because each of them, in their own way, taught her what it means to be human, fragile, heartbroken, yet unbreakable. Without those wounds, she once said softly, I wouldn't sing the way I do now. Pain turned into a strength. Betrayal turned into melody. Every note I sing is a drop of blood from a scar, but also a pair of wings that let me fly. And that is her legacy. Céline Dion is not the golden girl of the 90s anymore. She's not just the voice of Titanic or the diva of Las Vegas. She's something far greater, a testament to resilience, to motherhood, to faith, to the song that lives inside every broken soul. As the sun sets, she closes her eyes and whispers to the wind, never let anyone silence the music inside you. People will laugh, betray, and try to take it away. But your song is yours alone. The camera fades, her figure framed by light, fragile yet unshaken. 5 names, 5 wounds, 1 woman, and 1 final truth. She is still here, still singing, still Céline Dion,